hello there, friends, and welcome to the live broadcast of the Self-Employed Life podcast. I'm glad you're here. If you're joining us, the cool thing is you kind of get a behind-the-scenes perspective of these podcast interviews, which, in the end, wind up being edited and packaged really nicely. And this is kind of a raw version of it. So we're excited to have you here with us as well. So with that, we are going to dive into the real show. Who amongst us hasn't felt stuck at various points in our lives? Let's look at why we sometimes feel stuck and what we can do about it. Shira Miller, a two-time TEDx speaker, certified professional coach, and a former entrepreneur turned chief communications officer of a $2 billion corporation, knows a bit about getting unstuck and teaching people how to do the same for themselves. She has transitioned from financial ruin to prosperity, chronic health challenges to a constant state of wellness, obesity to sustaining a healthy weight loss, divorce to lasting love, and an unfulfilling career to a purpose-driven life. Her new book, Free and Clear, Get Unstuck and Live the Life You Want, features a step-by-step process for getting unstuck and staying that way for good. And who doesn't want that? So, Shira, welcome. I'm really glad you're here with us.
I am so excited to be here with you and your warriors today.
Awesome. Well, it is, it's a common occurrence in life. We go through these cycles, I guess you could say, of up and down, of being stuck. So let's start with understanding that a little bit. Like, what are the ways in which we feel stuck? And as you stated or as I stated in the introduction, that you've had various points of stuckness in your own life. So what from your own states of stuckness has inspired you to write this book?
Well, as you mentioned, I know a lot about getting unstuck, and I think it's my superpower. So I became really curious. Was there sort of process or commonalities that get people stuck? And I interviewed more than 100 people who faced challenges, some big, some small, and found that there were 7 patterns, 7 things that get people stuck, that once you understand it, you know how to deal with it and overcome those obstacles.
And we're going to go into those seven ways that people get stuck in a moment. But one of the things that I think you pointed out that I think is really important, and it's funny, it's been on my mind a lot. I've always said for years, I've somewhat jokingly said that if you want life to change, just wait 3 months. Right? 3 months to me has been like this magic formula that life can just look very different 3 months from today. And particularly when you're in a tough spot, I find that in 3 months, you'll be shocked at how far you've come. I've seen this as a pattern now with several of our podcast guests. I did an interview a while back about stress, and we spoke about the difference between good stress and bad stress. And the difference was, as she stated, was it became bad stress when it became chronic.
Yes.
It became chronic when the stress lasted more than 3 months. You speak about something similar about how being stuck, because we all get stuck now or net. We can have a stuck day, we can have a stuck hour, but the difference is when the stuckness becomes chronic. So can you talk about how do we know the difference and how do we know that we're in a state of caution, if you will, that we need to get ourselves unstuck?
A short-term stuck is the kind of thing you might experience in a day. You might have a traffic jam that made you late for a job interview. Maybe you were supposed to bring cupcakes to your kid's classroom. You got caught up in a client meeting and you forgot about it. They're inconveniences. They might feel awful in the moment, but it's something that is easily overcome. Chronic stuck is when you feel like you're living in quicksand. It feels like you're at the end of your rope. It's something that doesn't go away, and it can get worse over time. So it's that sensation of being overwhelmed by something. And sometimes you don't even know exactly what it is, which is why you do need to name your kind of stuck, but it doesn't go away. And that's the primary difference.
Let's talk a little bit about the naming of your form of stuck, because I think that's really important as well. I find as a coach that particularly when it comes to speaking to adults, that amazingly just shedding light on something, giving it a name can be at the beginning of a huge shift. So what are some of the stuck that we would name, and how have you seen the benefit of calling it out, helping people?
Are you talking about specifically some of the 7 different kinds of things?
Well, more so just, is there, I want to go into the 7 different ways that people get stuck, but I
Mhm.
think it's important to understand what type of stuck am I experiencing? Is it that I'm stuck in my career? Is it I'm
Yes.
stuck in my life? Like, is there a way that we should identify what, because we humans, we tend to throw everything in a big bucket, don't we? And I think that's part of the problem, right? So we think, oh, I'm just stuck in my life. Is it helpful to really get more specific? Say, no, you're stuck in my career. It's just making you feel like you're stuck in your life. Is it important to
Yes.
kind of break that apart?
It is because it makes it more manageable. Once you name it, you start to demystify it, and then you can create a plan for overcoming it. It's not this big bad that's, hovering in the background anymore. So it makes it specific and achievable to do something about it.
Yeah, because we do tend to throw everything in one big bucket. I mean, I've had people say to me, my life sucks. I'm stuck. I'm not going anywhere. I'm like, "Well, what part of it?" Right? Because chances
Exactly.
it's probably not all parts. It's probably something more specific. Okay, so let's get more specific and let's talk about the 7 things that get people stuck. All right, because in understanding how, the ways that we get stuck, and it can also help us identify what type of stuck we're experiencing. Love the first one, I have to say. The first one is you don't do you. So, what happens if you're not doing you?
You're being inauthentic, and sometimes it can be caused by wanting to please others or fit into a social group, but you're not acting in alignment with who you are or your values in life.
Yeah, yeah, really important. I mean, that to me, it's kind of toxic. There's a way in which if you continually live your life not doing you, whether it's because of the facade you feel you have to carry in life or in business, or it's the professional facade that you're upheld to, that it's toxic. It's in the same way that, and I've had so many guests come on my show and talk about the whole, fake it till you make it. How I've always had tried to have a fair opinion about it, right? I understand the benefits of fake it till you make it. I understand how if you fake it till you make it, especially in your 20s, that it can kind of pick you up. The problem is it can tend to be toxic because you're not doing you.
It's got an expiration date, and if you
Hmm.
keep faking it till you make it and you've already made it, you're going to end up in a whole buttload of being stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right. So, one of the things that people get stuck is you don't do you. The next is you're on a road to nowhere.
And this is when a road to nowhere is when you don't know your purpose, your reason for being in life. And it becomes hard when you don't have those guide rails to have a clear path forward, whether it's in your career or aspects of your personal life.
Mhm. So let's get underneath that a little bit because I think this is so important because it's a bit of a chicken and egg. And because I've had this conversation with people, they feel they're stuck because they're on a road to nowhere because they don't know their purpose. For those of us that feel aligned with our purpose, lucky you, right? I mean, I've often felt like lucky you because, boy, that really does propel you forward. But how does someone kind of a vicious cycle? How do we help somebody get out of that cycle if they're stuck because they feel like they're on a road to nowhere because they don't know their purpose? But being in that state makes it that much harder to really feel like what you're aligned with your purpose. How do you help people kind of get out of that cycle?
The first step is to actually pause and let yourself be. If you're constantly doing, you're not going to be able to see what the overall strategy, the purpose is that you would like to create. You got to start with the purpose. So, yeah, the chicken and egg. I was going to say you start with one. Okay, you start with purpose and you figure it out. And that's what lights you up. And you can break it down to, it doesn't have to be particularly grandiose. I think about my mother, and her purpose was to raise a happy, healthy family. She did. More power to you, Faye Goldberg Miller. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's getting clear about that. It could be to overcome, to make sure that you're the first one in your family that had an education, to make a difference in the world by raising money to fight cancer, to be the kind of entrepreneur that delivers exceptional customer service and transforms businesses because of it. So it's stopping to get really clear about that, and I even have an exercise about how to create a statement of purpose for yourself. You start there, and then you can get out of the road to nowhere.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the exercise.
For the statement of purpose, you need to stop and get really clear and then break it down. And it's really filling in the blank. So it is, my name is Shira Miller, and I am passionate about blank. And so my passion is helping people get unstuck. And the second part of that, I do this by blank. So it's how do you do it? If you go back to being an entrepreneur, is it doing it by selling a service? You're a coach. By being a coach that enables people to live their best lives. That's your purpose. That's how
Yeah.
you start to break it down.
Do you also find, because I think this feeling of being on the road to nowhere is pretty prevalent when people feel stuck. So one, I always try to encourage patience. But do you find that people are, when you think of like you're on the road to nowhere, compared to where, to who and where you think you should be, right? That to me is when they use the word nowhere, it's like, what's the criteria? What is the somewhere that you think you're supposed to be at? Who are you comparing it to? Because what I've experienced I'll say more so as a parent, when you've got multiple kids, I have 3 kids, everybody's on their own timeline. I mean, some you'll see through your kids, some of your kids find their purpose very early in life. Some may take a little bit longer, but that's true of all of us too. So is there a part there where you try to stress people to be patient with themselves as well as understand that there's a timeline for everybody that's different?
Patience is key, and your purpose can shift and change as you do in life. You can have a specific purpose that just motivates you in your 20s and 30s, and one day you wake up and you're 45 and it just doesn't work for
Yeah.
you anymore. And the beautiful thing is you can change it and shift it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always said if you were to ask me 15 years ago what my purpose on earth was, I would have said to be a photographer. Right now, with what I do today, I realize, oh no, the purpose I'm here is because the photography was really a learning lab. My purpose feels like, I am here to rise up the community of self-employed business owners. It just so happened I had a 38 years a career as a photographer to teach me things that I can now share. Right. So to your point, your purpose shifts, it waits. But I think getting people off of a timeline is really important, because when we feel like we're on a road to nowhere, we're often thinking we should be somewhere.
Right. And
And by
also,
by whose criteria? By who, what timeline?
and something you just noted so brilliantly, it's comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
It's you don't need to look at what other people are doing. Um, it's what works for you. There's no
Yeah.
race.
Yeah.
Just, be present and be patient, and you will figure out what you need for you.
Yeah. There's a wonderful meme that circulates on social media every now and then about, and I don't remember who it was or the ages, but people like, Colonel Sanders discovered Kentucky Fried Chicken when he was 70 years old or something. There's like this long list of people that we know today to be highly successful that didn't find their thing, their purpose until much later in life. And it always brings me a little bit of joy to know that that message is out there to try to get people off this self-imposed timeline that they think they're supposed to be somewhere. All right. So the next of the 7 ways is, this is fascinating to me, is you don't consider forgiveness. Tell us more about how forgiveness plays a role here.
I'm thinking of forgiveness in 2 different aspects. Forgiving other people, because there's an energy drain when you carry around the burden of unforgiveness. And even more importantly, in some cases, it's an unwillingness to forgive yourself. So if you think that, you know what? I'm going to share a personal story here. I had a public relations firm. I had my own business for 13 years. When the Great Recession happened, I didn't see it coming. And like 200,000 other small businesses, my business failed. I had to fire 6 amazing employees. I was $100,000 in debt. I was on the lease I had an office lease for 6 more years. I was in a fancy office tower. It was crazy. And at that time, I felt this horrible sense of shame. I wouldn't forgive myself. I carried it around for a few years. I paid off all of the debt. I continued to serve clients. I did it all on my own. And I didn't forgive myself for years. When I finally did, I could really move forward and find a different purpose, a different way of being that was a lot more satisfying. But to not carry that around creates such a terrible burden, and it really hurts your well-being.
Yeah, there's gosh, to relate this, as so often do here on the podcast, relate it to personal lives and loving relationships, because there's so much correlation when you're self-employed between how we think in business and how we think in our personal lives. And there's a wonderful love song by Sam Smith, who I think is fantastic. But I think the song is actually called "Forgive Myself." But the core message of the song, which I believe so many people can relate to, is that I can't give love again until I first forgive myself. Right? He was recognizing through the lyrics of this song that he couldn't move on, couldn't get unstuck from where he was at and be in another loving relationship until he first learned to forgive himself for having harmed the previous relationship and walking away from it. And clearly he has some regrets in doing so. Right. So again, a kind of a really important example of forgiveness. And I do agree, and I can imagine that forgiving others, and if we don't forgive others, can certainly keep us stuck. Actually, somebody I shared the TEDx stage with, one of the other speakers, Sarah Montana, I believe her name was. Her TEDx talk was about forgiveness because a family friend, neighbor, had broken into their house one evening and killed her mother and her brother.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, just a shocking circumstance, right? And here she was giving a TEDx talk about forgiveness because she realized there was no place for her to go in her life. Now, she's a teenager when this happened. There
Mhm.
was just no place for her to go in her life until she forgave this person who killed her mother and brother, because otherwise she would be carrying on the anger for her whole life. And she had a long life ahead of her. So the power of forgiveness and getting unstuck, to your point, relates to both how we forgive other people and also, I think I see in a lot of people their need to forgive themselves in order to move on.
So true.
So important. What a wonderful lesson to bring into there. The next is you don't trust yourself. Tell us more about that.
It's when you grapple with self-doubt. And you could be incredibly confident about running a business. You know you're going to crush it, but you might not be confident about meeting the right person or about, getting healthier or taking chances in life. So, it's funny. It's not an all or nothing proposition when it comes to self-doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. And we self employed are full of self doubt, all the self words, right? When I was doing some preliminary research before I launched the Self Employed Business Institute, I reached out to some people that I thought would give me great insights as to, who was I building this for and what they wanted. I was actually very surprised at how many of these very accomplished business people that I felt would benefit from the Self-Employed Business Institute. But I asked them, like, what would inspire you to join? Like, what would be the value that you would need to see in order to join us? And one of the very common things people said is, I'm very confident in myself and I doubt myself. So it would
Mhm.
be helpful to be amongst a community and to have a coach such as myself that could level that out, because and it's so true of self-employment. We could be so confident in our abilities and our skills, and we can present ourselves that way. And at the same time, we doubt ourselves so in such a paralyzing way that it can keep us stuck.
It really does.
I love that. The next one is kind of fun just because of the way you present it, but oh so true, is that you're a Debbie Downer. I mean, there is absolutely, and I think you even have some research on this, there's absolutely a correlation between optimism, pessimism, and the likelihood of being stuck. So tell us about why we should not be a Debbie Downer.
A Debbie Downer is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will get stuck in the cycle of if you think everything bad is going to happen, you know what? It sure will.
Yeah.
And when you are given the choice between optimism and pessimism, you can actively choose optimism. And there's so many tremendous benefits for your health, cognitively, for your overall well-being. It will make you more successful in every area of your life.
Yeah, so important. The next one, and certainly very true today, is you're not flexible. That can cause you to be stuck. So tell us about that.
It's an unwillingness to pivot. I mean, you might have crushed your business goals for 20 years and then something changes. I don't know, a pandemic happens and the business maybe you had organizing in-person meetings evaporates overnight. So you need to be able to pivot. And so you have to be open to pivoting and finding out sometimes you might need to, reinvent yourself. What's going to work moving forward? So you've got to be open and flexible to change.
Yeah, and I think, gosh, I think flexibility plays out in so many ways. And yes, in an ever-changing world, we need to be flexible with the way things are happening. But I also there's this, I almost don't have words for it, but there's an inside sense of flexibility. I can kind of see it in my mom as she's aged. Just how what her mindset is and how rigid she's become in her own time schedule. And perfectly understandable, but I also can see how, there's not a lot of room there for. something unknown if we're if we're too inflexible. And that I can absolutely see, particularly from a pure business strategy, that can keep us stuck. Like, this is the way I've always done it. This is the way I have to do it. It's like, but that may not be what's working today. And I think that plays out, as I see as a coach, all the time in mindset.
Mhm.
One of the things I talk about a lot is there's likely to be in your mindsets a way of thinking that got you to where you are, but won't get you to where you want to go. Right. And are you flexible to see the world differently? Are you flexible in your mindsets to think differently? Because I see it all the time. It's like, that way of thinking has served you incredibly well. Being a perfectionist, for example, has served you really well up to this point. The problem is now the world is moving so fast it doesn't have time for your perfection. So maybe you need to put some things out a little less than perfect.
Mhm.
Right. So it's a way of being flexible in your mindset that, kudos to you. Like, what got you here is because you are perfect in everything that you put out in the world. The problem is now it's keeping you stuck because you're not willing to put anything out that's any less than perfect, which might actually beat others to the punch. And you need to move quick.
Great.
Right?
That's
So
an excellent point.
yeah, I think its flexibility is deeper than people think. I think it's, on the surface, it's being flexible in our businesses, being willing to pivot. But I actually think we have to really look deep at how flexible are our mindsets,
Mhm.
so that we can operate in the best way in business today. Now, this one sounds rather dreadful. Your yeah, certainly would indicate you're stuck. Is you're shipwrecked?
Okay, I have a flair for the dramatic when it comes to
Yes,
naming the
a
7
bit.
things.
I
And
love
so
it.
and I'm not, thinking of Tom Hanks talking to, a volleyball, his only source of friendship here,
Yeah.
okay? So when you're shipwrecked, you're isolated in some way, and of course, that did become more pronounced in recent times, and it could be that you don't have a community of support, or you can have such a strong streak of independence that you are willing to help other people, till the cows come home, but you won't accept help yourself. And as small business owners, we need to be connected to others. We need to accept help and share thinking and get different perspectives. So when you're isolated, it's so easy to get stuck.
Yeah, it's funny. Understanding that now, conversing with you in a way that I didn't understand in the book, and not a flaw in the book at all. Just, having the personal conversation about it reminds me of something I've spoken about a fair amount, and every time I do, it seems to push some serious buttons from certain people, and I refer to it as being silo-minded.
Hmm.
Right. So one of the ways that you're shipwrecked, to use Shira's term, in my mind, is kind of like you're silo minded. And what I mean by that is that you're operating in a way in your business where you're doing everything yourself.
Yes,
And to really look at what's the problem with that is that if so many people, almost all of us, we want to be hired for our expertise. Whatever expertise is our thoughts, our expertise is a talent we have. We want to get hired for our expertise. But if you operate in business in a way that you're silo minded and you're doing everything yourself, how can you expect to be hired as an expert if you're not willing to hire experts in their field?
that's so true.
Right. And it's a way I see people operating in business that I try to break that cycle, because they want to get hired for the highest value for what they're good at. And yet they'll be, "Oh, I can fix my own website. I could do my own bookkeeping. I could do it." It's like, but you're being silent. And there's actually a karmic perspective to it. Like, how can you expect to be hired as an expert if you're not willing to hire experts in your own business? I didn't think about it. I didn't see that correlation when I read the book, but I do now, about being shipwrecked. Like, that's a way of shipwrecking yourself. You're making yourself shipwrecked on an island, talking to a soccer ball.
Yes, a very sad, lonely place to be.
Exactly. Exactly. Love that. So, we certainly have given everyone strong indication as to how they can identify if they're stuck, what their type of stuck might be called. But now let's give some hope here. Let's talk about getting unstuck. Uh, let's start with mindset, because that's always where I go first. Right. So as we begin the process of getting unstuck, there's have you ever seen the Bob Newhart? I think it was a Comedy Central special. Bob Newhart does a skit called "Stop It."
I haven't seen it, and I
Oh my
think it's
gosh.
hilarious.
Everybody listening in, and Shira, you included, you have to just go to YouTube and search Bob Newhart "Stop It." It will be the funniest few minutes you'll ever. I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times. without blowing it's okay to share the premise. The premise of it is that somebody goes to Bob Newhart, who's a therapist, for help with all her fears, and he just keeps telling, well, stop it. But I have a fear of have a fear of the world's going to cave in on me. He's like, well, stop it. And he just goes to this, and it's hysterical because sometimes life is that simple, right? Sometimes we just need somebody to tell us to stop it. So when it comes to getting unstuck, which is not a small task, and it's not just telling somebody to stop it, but it does likely begin with you telling yourself or listening to someone, there's some way of looking differently, some mindset shift that you must start with. Tell us a little bit more, like where might somebody start to change their own way of thinking in order to get
There,
unstuck?
you hit something that I call the tipping point, and that is where the pain of being stuck is less bearable than changing. And
Mhm.
so you actually reach a point where you are willing to do something about it. So it
Yes.
is you making a conscious choice that you are ready to quit. Whatever's holding you back, it could be a person, it could be a situation, your own limiting beliefs. And it's you start at that point, and then you actively give yourself permission to change. Remember permission slips that you had to fill out for your kids that they could do all the different activities and go see the state capitol. You had to
Yeah.
sign this.
Yeah.
So one of the exercises that I've got in the book is actually a permission slip that you fill out to get unstuck in a certain way so that you can move forward. So it absolutely starts with shifting your mindset and giving yourself permission to be different.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head when you said that when the pain of being staying stuck is
Mhm.
more unbearable than the change. That's always the root of change. Always the root of change is that staying where you are, thinking the same way, is more painful than changing. All right, love that. You mentioned a moment ago about taking a pause, and I kind of want to take a pause and go back to that because, first of all, I understand and have always believed the power in a great book by Peter Senge called Presence, right, which is all about theory you, the pause being at the bottom of the shape of you. Proven science that shows that if you pause, you come out the other side faster. So much science and research behind the benefit of the pause. And we're speaking to self-employed business people who don't know how to pause very well, and and a practical sometimes can't. Believe me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. That there are times I think I just want to run away, right?
Yes.
you know, I've had many of those moments. I just want to run away. Oh, but I have a client meeting. Oh, I have coaching clients. Oh, I have. That's the reality. How are some of the ways that because it doesn't have to be a big pause, but what are some of the things we can do for self-employed business owners that might not be able to run away? And if you can, consider it. But what if you can't? What are some of the ways we can pause?
A pause it can just take a few minutes. You don't have to go to Bora Bora, which honestly sounds fabulous. I wish I could, but you can do a couple of simple little things. You can take as little as a 1-minute mental break each hour just to rest your mind and be refreshed. Shut down your smart devices, step away from the laptop. You can time it for 1 minute just of complete quiet so that you can be. And you can see a shift in just a little bit of that time. And there's something that I've heard you say in some of your other episodes that you do that I think is brilliant, and that is go to different locations when you are trying to do different tasks. So you might want to, go into your kitchen just to step away from the office if you're working from home and take a break for 10 or 15 minutes. Be outside. Take a walk around the block. Go to a nearby park. When you have a different scenery, it's going to activate different parts of your mind and thinking. So it's stepping away from where you're actually working 10 minutes, 15 minutes, if you don't have, longer than that. And you can see a difference in the clarity, your ability to think, and just in your overall well being.
Yeah, I definitely leverage environment to shift my mindset and shift my space and take a pause. I love that you're mentioning that. I also, I think it's also important to acknowledge in my book, actually, I don't quite say it this way, but I talk about spontaneous days off.
Mhm.
I had considered calling them snow days, but I realized not everybody's in the north where it might snow. But think about the pause that was created when you were a kid and you had a sudden snow day. And one of the things we self-employed people do is we don't give ourselves snow days. We don't give ourselves personal days. We're lucky if we give ourselves vacation days. I talk about this in the self-employed life that one of the things I started doing 35 years into being in business, I started giving myself Friday afternoons off during the summer because I was jealous of all my corporate friends who had summer Fridays. And I'm like, I own my own business and I don't give myself summer Fridays. Like, what's wrong here? But I think likewise, like, why not? And I do this. Why not prepare yourself not only for, hey, maybe take summer Fridays, maybe that becomes knowing you have that coming up as a pause, but why not also give yourself 5 paid personal days, 5 sick days? Because you know what? Your traditionally employed friends have those. Why shouldn't you be able to call on a pause spontaneously, cancel appointments if you have to? If you gave yourself 5 days a year that you allowed yourself guilt free to call in sick, call in for a personal day because you needed that pause, even at the sacrifice of appointments, like 5 days a year, I don't think that's a crime. But I hardly know any self employed person that structures their year assigning themselves 5 guilt free snow days. And I think we should.
It's such a smart
Yeah.
suggestion, and you think about it, you go into business, one of the motivators for so many people is you don't want a boss over your shoulder. You wanna be the boss of you.
Yeah.
So
Except we're
why
horrible bosses. Like I love this.
exactly.
There's a phrase that says something like, my boss is an a-hole and I work for myself. And I'm like, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. But like, I love the pause has, I mean, like I said right at the beginning, the pause has been proven by science and research to be valuable, and we self-employed people are so bad at it. So I highly encourage all you warriors to treat yourself to some pauses and some spontaneous snow days and all the such. All right, so next thing you suggest to help us get unstuck, huge believer in this as well, is trust, and you tie in confidence as well. But boy, I love trust because all sorts of reasons, but I want to hear your take on that. How does trust and confidence get us out of being stuck?
When you trust yourself, well, here, okay, let me say the consequence of it. When you don't trust yourself and you've got a lot of doubt, you're not gonna take chances. You're not going to believe in yourself that, oh, I think I can grow my business in this way, or I can offer something new and different, or I can break into a completely different market area when you don't have that confidence. So when you start to build that trust, you will take more chances and you can create so much more success and happiness.
Yeah, I think one of the ways I see trust or a lack of trust keeping people stuck is no matter how much the entrepreneurs I work with tell me that they trust their employees, they trust other people, they trust things will work out. They talk about trust, and I'll look at them and say, then why do you operate as if the weight of the world is on your shoulders? Like if you actually are trusting, I mean, you can just see the weight that so often we business owners carry in our shoulders, that we are carrying the weight of being able to pay our mortgage and our rent and supporting our families and our children. And we're carrying all of this weight. And sometimes it's not the weight of financial obligation, but the weight of, as women business owners will say, I want to pay my own way. Like there's a self-esteem part to it. Like, sure, I may be in a life situation that I'm safe, but damn it, I want to prove to myself that I can do this. And everyone has that right, and I stand by that 100%. But there's a way in which that turns into this weight on the shoulders, which to me is always an indicator that you're saying you trust, but you're not really trusting, because you also have to trust in the process. You have to trust in timing. You have to trust maybe in something bigger than you, but just trust that if you put your best effort in, that trust that hopefully it'll work out, and it should work out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think trust plays a huge role into getting unstuck, because if you don't trust that you can get out of it, that there's forces working on your behalf,
Mhm.
and if you feel like it's all up to you to get unstuck, it's that much harder to do so.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, I want to also, as I was reading your book, Shira, I thought a little bit of the work of Byron Katie. You might know her work,
Yes.
and I was thinking about it because in one of the ways, I mean, her own story about how she got unstuck from depression and was these really simple, powerful questions. And I think to me, it felt like there was a fair amount of that as well. And you talk about assessing yourself. So I want to hear a little bit more from you about that, because like one of the notes I made to myself is that, as Brian Katie often says, is it true? Right? Sometimes we can get ourselves so stuck in something that, oh, I'm this or I'm not that. And you actually have to ask, but is it even true?
That's a very powerful question,
Yeah.
especially if you're grappling with negative self-talk. That's called the inner saboteur,
Yeah.
and that, you're not worthy, or that's a crazy idea, or you could have outdated beliefs of yourself that even stem from childhood that you've outgrown. And now you might be a 50-year-old individual, incredibly successful by any typical definition, but you question yourself. You don't have confidence in yourself in some area because of outdated beliefs that you've outgrown.
Yeah, you touch on something in the book that very rarely do I see somebody having the wherewithal to see this in the world, and it's particularly, I think it applies a lot to us self-employed, and it plays into, as I was saying before, like what got us here may not get you to where you want to go, and it's, I think for a lot of us, particularly those of us of a certain generation, we've used negative self-talk as a motivator.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, we look for, boy, I saw this so obvious as a photographer because I was so self-critical of my talent, so self-critical of the quality. And I thought I was doing myself and the world a favor by being so critical. And at the time, maybe I was. That may have been a mindset that made me in demand as a photographer because people could expect the best because I was beating myself up and using criticism as a motivator to get better. That's a loop I see a lot of people in that I will say, not only on an individual basis, I just don't think it jives with the world as well anymore. I don't think it jives with the energy of the world and society, is the use of negative self-talk as a motivator. Like, I'm going to beat myself down because then I'm going to try harder or be better. You know what, folks? It just doesn't work so well anymore.
It doesn't, and instead replace the negative self-talk with self-compassion. It's going to
Yeah.
get you a lot farther in today's circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something I still grapple with. Like, if I put on a few pounds, I'll criticize myself for putting on weight to motivate myself to lose it. I'm like, but there's other motivators, right? But there's, it's really interesting. And I highly caution everybody to look at the ways in which you're using what I often refer to as a negative fuel source. Like, are
Mhm.
you using it as a negative fuel source? You're using negativity, negative self-talk to push yourself harder, to be better at what you do. Again, toxic, right?
Mhm.
It in the long run doesn't work. Lastly, the last thing I think we'll touch on as far as how to get unstuck, because I'm so in favor of this, as you say, is to notice the good things.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
tell us more about that.
It was actually created by Martin Seligman, who is a noted psychologist. About when you start to notice things, that's actually what is going to be attracted into your energy field in life. There's something called the reticular activating system. It's a part of
Yeah,
your brain. I've heard you talk about it in other podcasts,
yep,
so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
big
When
fan
you
of it.
Okay,
Yeah,
you know what? You buy a blue car, all of a sudden you notice there's a bunch of blue cars everywhere. When you start to notice the positive things in life, it's going to create greater resonance for bringing more positive things in.
yeah,
So it's as simple as noticing three things, and I advocate that you write them down. So, what are three good things that happened that day? You could do it in a journal exercise in the morning. You could do it just thinking about it before you go to bed, and more goodness is sure to follow.
I'm positive there are warriors listening and thinking, yeah, but Jeffrey talks about this all the time because one of the things I teach, and it's the only content that's in both of my books. And I'm warning you all, folks, it might be in the next book and the book after that. The only thing I repeated in both my books is what I call a what's going right journal
Mhm.
as a daily practice for all the reasons you just mentioned. It is scientifically proven that if you see what's going right, you're going to see more of what's going right. You can't unsee it. Like you said, you see a blue car, you're going to see a lot of blue cars. Somebody tells you about a movie or a book you never heard of, and suddenly it's going to seem like it's everywhere. Guess what? It's already been there. It's the power of recognition. That your brain can only recognize what it already knows. So you have the power to decide what you want to see in your life by deciding what you want to recognize and know it. Right.
Yes.
So I think when it comes to, and that's actually, in transparency, that's how I started the What's Going Right journal. I actually started the What's Going Right journal at, I would say, a stuck time, certainly a more challenging time in my life. 6 years ago or so, I had moved to Miami. I was living in a new city. I wasn't positive I was going to stay here long term, but I'd moved to a new place. I came down here in a relationship that didn't survive. So now I'm alone in a new city, reinventing my career. I had already chosen to do less photography, but less photography became even more it kind of happened quicker than I thought it would. So I found myself in a challenging place and looking for a way to, how do I get myself unstuck? How do I get my mind out of this? And that's when I started the What's Going Right journal, just based on science and research. I'm like, well, if I start seeing more of what's going, and it was not easy at first. When everything's going bad, as I often tell my clients, when everything seems like it's going bad and it's harder to see what's going right, is actually when you need to do it the most. Right. So you have to stick with it and find, look even deeper at what's going next. But Shira, I commend you on writing a book on getting unstuck. Thank you for writing such a book. I don't actually know that there are too many out there, and yet, and I think this is probably the first podcast we've done as specifically as how to get unstuck, and yet it's one of life's most common experiences. So thank you for addressing the issue.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here today.
Awesome. But before I let you go, we're going to do our rapid round and get to know a little bit more about you. The rapid round is around the acronym of SELF. The S in SELF stands for sustainability. You kind of alluded to it, but what's one daily habit you have that sustains you?
Each morning, I start the day with a journal entry, and know you're going to approve of this. But even if it's just 5 minutes, and I think about, what are my current circumstances? What do I want to claim from the day? What's going right?
Yeah, 100%. Makes perfect sense. The E in SELF stands for elevate. What's one thing you suggest we could do to elevate our business?
Start celebrating your successes. As an entrepreneur, it's so easy to go, okay, that was a nice win or milestone. What's next? Pause, actually celebrate it, and do something to celebrate. Get a massage, see some friends for dinner, whatever brings you joy. Go ahead and make sure that you're celebrating.
Love that. The L in SELF stands for let's go. What's one action step you would suggest we take even today?
Excuse me, Jeffrey, I'm having an allergy attack.
Oh gosh, okay. No worries.
Make sure that you schedule time for self-care. That self-care is not selfish. And when you are running a business, you are burning the candle at both ends. You need to make sure that you take those moments to do what brings you joy. That could be working out. It could be taking a walk. It could even be going to a movie by yourself so you don't have to share the popcorn.
I love it. I love that. The F in SELF stands for facing a challenge. With all that you've accomplished, particularly around becoming unstuck, what's the challenge you still face?
Okay, I have a love-hate relationship with my ultimate frenemy. It is refined sugar. And I'm somebody, I lost 50 pounds almost 30 years ago. I've kept most of it off. But whenever stress related, sometimes I'll just get into the chocolate candy jar, and I just can't think as well. It brings my energy down. So, yep, always grappling with that.
Understood. Thank you for sharing that. So, Shira, tell us the best way to find out more about your book, about you, and what you're up to.
Go visit ShiraMiller.com. That's Shira, S-H-I-R-A, Miller.com. The book is going to be out on May 6th. You can also, I've written over 100 articles about well-being, authentic leadership, self-care. Check out the whole repository and take the quiz to find out what kind of stuck are you facing, to learn how you can get unstuck.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure your link is available at our show notes as well, which is jeffreyshaw.com/podcast. So go there to find all of Shira's contact information as well as her website. And if you're listening to this podcast in the traditional podcast form, just know that you can also watch these conversations live streaming or the recording on YouTube. So that's a recent change we've made. So love that you're listening to it in its traditional form, but often these broadcast 6 to 8 weeks after the actual conversation. So if you'd like, you can get a little bit of a behind the scenes glimpse by also following me on YouTube and catching it there while we live stream it as well as the recording. But Shira, thank you so much for being here and helping us all get unstuck. And like I said, with one of life's most common experiences. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And remember, you might be in business for yourself, but you're not in business by yourself. Be your best self, be proud, and keep changing the world.